Hello, this is Dale Matthews, and I'm joined tonight by Mike Jones and Orville Camp. Hello, gentlemen.
Good evening, Dale.
Hi, Dale. This is Orville.
Now, Orville Camp might sound like a nice place to pitch your tent, but it's not a place. He's a person, and he lives in the Illinois Valley. His land is surrounded on three sides by BLM managed forest land and by Rough and Ready on the fourth side. It's a good illustration of the checkerboard pattern of lands in Josephine County. Fortunately for us, Mr. Camp is an internationally recognized expert in sustainable forest management. He literally wrote the book on the subject. Welcome, Mr. Camp.
Hi, Dale. Glad to be here.
As we go through the show, if it seems to you as if you're hearing a crackling in the background, that's because the forest fires are so close to Mr. Camp's house that you can hear them. No, that's not the reason, Mike?
No. We just, I guess we have a bad line here. We've tried this connection a couple of times already, and then we get the same crackle every time here. So that's just what we're going to have to deal with.
All right. Well, everybody, you will be able to tolerate this because, after all, as we always point out to you, you're getting this show for free. So just relax. And now, Mr. Camp is going to talk a bit with us about. We know that these fires are happening all over the place. This is not the first warm summer in recorded history in our area. It's not the first dry summer, but it does seem to be a bit of a repeat of what happened in 2013. So, Mr. Camp, if the BLM would listen to you, what advice would you give them about how to manage a forest? And do forests really need to be managed?
Well, the advice that I have been giving to them for years now, at least a decade, is to implement the natural selection alternative, which the community supported enormously supported by numerous groups and has been for a very long time. It's the natural selection alternative that it isn't a management-based approach. Forestry assumes that humans can manage life on the planet in sustainable ways, and there is virtually no evidence to support that idea. And so the natural selection alternative uses those kind of relationships because that's how life evolved and it's been sustained for about 4 billion years that we know of. And anyway, I got exposed to Darwin's theory on natural selection back in 1957 and immediately saw it as a basis for a sustainable solution to forestry and agricultural practices. And we've been implementing it now for almost half a century here in Selma.
Now, when you refer to natural selection, the first thing that comes to mind is, when stupid people do stupid things and kill themselves, that's bettering the species by natural selection. But what do you mean by it in terms of forest management?
Well, first of all, you can't define it in terms of forest management because you need to understand that when a farmer grows trees, for example, it's called agriculture, and when a forester grows trees using exactly the same management practice, it's called forestry. So a forest is legally defined. In fact, I'll read you the BLM definition of forest land. It says land at least 10% stocked by forest trees of any size and including land that formerly had such tree cover and capable of redeveloping forested conditions. Okay, well, that definition eliminates the millions of species in and around trees that sustain trees and us. So basically, when you're talking about a forest, you're talking about land stocked with trees. It's no different than if it's stocked with an apple orchard. It's land stocked with trees, and it uses exactly the same management practices as agriculture does. So you can't use that, and then you can't use management because we don't do management. We have no management costs. All of our management costs, so-called management costs, are tied to harvesting. anything is coming out, and very few people can tell anything is coming out, and yet we harvest on an annual basis. We probably produce at least 3 times the timber of any forestry or agricultural management program on Earth for such a piece of ground because we have no downtime, absolutely no downtime. We harvest only the dead and dying, which means that we retain optimal photosynthesis across the landscape, which no forestry or agricultural program does. And also, by doing that, we've found that we can get far better lumber from those sources. So no forest management practice achieves that because it's based on the anthropocentric model of having dominion over every living thing. In other words, the definition that we have in our culture basically says that agriculture is the tilling of the soil and the growing of crops, right? Okay, well, that's effective what it is. What agriculture and forestry is we take our tools, our biological leveraging devices, we destroy natural community ecosystems, we claim their land, and we enslave their species in the form of land stocked with crops, including trees. So that forces us to take care of those species, and it forces us to defend from their enemies, and it forces us to declare an unwinnable war against all of the species that try to reclaim those lands. It's an unwinnable war. It's the same war that all civilizations are based on, and it's the same reason that all civilizations in history have failed. And so basically, our language has evolved out of the agricultural relationships we have on the planet. And the irony of it is by enslaving all of these other species, we enslave ourselves in the form of land ownerships that actually deny the natural selection relationships that sustain life. To my mind, that's the ultimate in stupidity, dumber than the angleworms that inhabit the earth. So, I mean, that's how far out of tune we are. In our language, we have to go back and redefine our language, which has been an enormous task for me. Does that make sense?
Yes, to some degree. So basically what you're saying is that you would go in and harvest trees that are either dead or dying and leave trees that are in any other stage of their life cycle.
Basically, yes, because the philosophy, like the natural selection alternative came out of the plan that I wrote for BLM, which went through the environmental assessment here a number of years ago, and according to their own assessment, met all the purpose and need and would have the impact of a no-action alternative, but they sold the timber to local timber companies, so it never happened. But so that's where the name natural selection alternative came from, but it actually is a subtitle of my book, which I call Ecostry, The Art of Seeing Through Nature's Eyes, the Natural Selection Alternative to Farming and Forestry Managed Relationships. So, and in defining ecostry is the philosophy, science, art, and occupation of seeing, understanding, and relating to natural community ecosystems, not forests, not tree farms, things like that, natural community ecosystems that sustain photosynthesis and species trait environment compatibility. There is no forestry or agricultural management program on Earth that can do that. In other words, if you look at the human body, the parts sustain the whole that sustain the parts. If you look at the biosphere, the thin layer around Earth that sustains life, it's the same story. The parts sustain the whole that sustain the parts. We can't even manage our own body sustainably, let alone anything else on Earth. And not only that, it costs us a lot of money.
Right.
To try.
Yes.
Orville, one of the things that people say occasionally is that the reason that you might end up with wolves in your backyard or bears trying to break into your house or whatever is that people are pressing too far up to the forests and to the wilderness areas. But I've been out to your place. I spent half a day there, and you don't live that far from the forest. I mean, it's basically all around you, and you've figured out a way where family timber harvesters can live with the trees and help the trees grow, and where the management of the forest is generally left up to Mother Nature, you figured out a way to do this. And as you just pointed out to us, your harvesting takes place around the year. What why are there questions about your methods, and you can't even get the commissioner to come out and visit you? Where's the resistance coming from?
Well, because of agriculture and so forth, we evolved, and I have 22 reasons in my book why civilization is sustainable. One of those is that we have a money-prioritized trade economic system. In other words, businesses prioritize money. What they do is, when you take a job for money, for the timber industry, for example, your priority, if you're a corporation, you are mandated to prioritize money. So basically, you prioritize money by you destroy natural community ecosystems for money. They can't buy them back. But this process is fatally flawed. All civilizations that I know of are in that category. They are all fatally flawed because you're able to do that. You externalize your collateral damage costs to nature and the human community, other people, and so you don't pay those costs. Virtually every timber sale that I know of that's ever been made by the U.S. government, somebody else pays for that. And you know that's a fundamental problem in lawmaker laws in civilizations throughout the world. It's the very reason that every civilization in history fails. One of the very reasons.
So, are you saying that harvesting in this way, or this sustainability, costs more money, and that's why they don't choose it, or
no?
Am I reading that wrong?
No, we have no management costs. We can compete with them, but we're held responsible. They are not. If you're a corporation, you are not held responsible. You're not held accountable for anything in terms of externalized costs. And you can't, because the sole purpose of corporations and governments is that they're entities and they're created by their managers. And the sole purpose of these entities is to shield and protect their managers from being held accountable. And the stockholder invests in that very thing to make money. So that's the reason why we're destroying the planet for money. They can't buy it back.
Well, let me ask you this. I'm sorry, because I didn't know that we were going to be talking about the world economic system here. But my question is we have all these fires, and it's been mentioned by a number of people, including some politicians, that in a checkerboard pattern, if BLM isn't more careful about the way they manage their forests, that we're all going to suffer. Which sort of ties in with what you were saying. What would you, I mean, this could take a while to do this, but how would you advise BLM, if they'd listen to you, about how they cannot have forests that are burning down around our ears?
Well, the natural selection alternative demonstrates that better than any forestry management program I know of on Earth. And it does that because of the whole infrastructure is set up to retain the system, retain natural late successional communities, that's old growth and so forth, where the lowest fuel and fire hazard conditions are. Not only that, but it sets up not foresters, not managers to manage this. It sets up trustees, and trustees are across the landscape. They have their own firefighting equipment, so therefore they have the first best initial attack response of anything. Furthermore, I personally designed and constructed well over 200 miles of transportation system to accommodate this system in the U.S. and Canada, and set up more than 30 places, in the two countries to do this. And it addresses every one of these fire issues. And I have a lot of experience in firefighting. I was a volunteer firefighter here in the Selma area from 1968 into the 80s, and then I had equipment on Silver Fire, Longwood Fire, and countless other Walker Mountain Fire, you name it. And I've been on those fires, and I'm here to tell you that the leading cause of forest-related fires is forest management practices. everything that they do under forest management increases those fuel and fire hazard risk. Everything. There is no such thing as reducing fuel and fire hazard conditions and making it better. And you can take the top of Hayes Hill, for example. They just did fuel fire hazard reductions there, and I've discussed this with BLM in the past. And within about 5 years, it's worse than ever. And the irony of this thing is that the taxpayers are paying about $1,000+ per acre to have this done. And then the further irony of this is I was setting up private owners in U.S. and Canada for less than the cost, the taxpayer cost, to do this fuel and fire hazard condition, which would provide a hugely better fuel and fire hazard protection plan in every way.
Could you describe for me what is the difference between what they do for fire hazard reduction and what you would do, and then also why is it that when they did this 5 years ago, it now is worse than it was before? Why is that?
Well, because if you maintain a canopy cover, there's three essentials to fire, and of course, the first one is fuel, and what that fuel is, whether it's small or large, whether it's dried out, has moisture content, and so forth, and heat and oxygen. If you open that up, you increase all three of those. As a matter of fact, if you remove one old growth tree, for example, and you take and measure ground surface temperatures below that tree before and after it's removed, you might get right on our hot day here, maybe you'll get 80-degree surface temperatures on the surface of that soil.
Mm-hmm.
If you remove that tree, you can easily measure 140, 150 degrees.
Right.
All right? Well, that's the leading contributor in itself. So when you're taking out green foliage, you are increasing the reflected area. In other words, the sun energy sustains life on the planet. Photosynthesis is the only system that converts that sun energy into living energy systems in terms of plants. Okay? So every time you remove a green plant, you are removing that photosynthesis, and you are reducing productivity. But not only that, you are hugely increasing fire risk. That's one of the countless reasons why I only take out dead and dying, because you're not doing that.
Right. Now, this kind of reminds me of some years back. I had a piece of property, and I wanted to. It was, quite high on a hill, and I wanted to increase the view of the valley. So I went and had all the trees, the limbs lifted up probably, 60, 80 feet off the ground. They were very, very tall trees. And then I went through and I took out a whole bunch of the underbrush underneath. The next year, even, it was coming back with a vengeance so fast. I couldn't believe how fast this underbrush was coming back. And I assume that this situation that you're talking about over there on Hayes Hill is somewhat similar.
All of them are the same, do the same thing. They start with grasses, all that sort of thing. And right now on top of Hayes Hill, you got all the grasses under there. I'll tell you right now, if a fire started there, you wouldn't be able to run fast enough to get ahead of it.
Yes.
And that's only done a few years ago. So they hugely increased fuel and fire hazard there. What you need to understand, and I could carry my firefighting days experience, from the time I went on the fire department here in '68 into the mid-'80s, we had not one single major fire in this community. And we didn't have radios, we didn't have sophisticated fire equipment. What we had was shovels and a telephone tree. We just couldn't call one another. We went out with a shovel and put it out in the early stages. In 1988, I got called onto the fire because people wanted us to protect their areas out in Takelma. And I was on, like I mentioned earlier, I was on a lot of fires, and that's where I realized we had paid people on the fire department. And job security, if you're a firefighter, is not putting those fires out. The job security is keeping them burning, and I experienced that big time.
Wow.
We have a money prioritized system. It doesn't pay to put out fires in the early stages if you want to make lots of money. And right now, we went at that time from just about anybody being able to be called on a fire. I've got 2 fire trucks, and I can't be called because I'm not retrofitted to meet corporate standards. And the fact I she several years, not well, just a few years ago, I had neighbors call me because there wasn't anybody responding to the fire. I mean, this is ridiculous, you know.
Mr. Kemp, do you see a relationship between factory fishing? You bring out a couple of really huge ships, and they practically dredge across the bottom of the ocean. They snap up every fish, every living thing that's there, pull it all in, and then process it on board the ships. Do you see a relationship between that, the corporatization of fishing, versus, you know, the little family fishing boats that have been keeping those families alive for generations, and what happens with forestry, the way that it's being managed by the BLM?
Yeah, it's a civilization fatal flaw in the process. And what civilizations do is, like I was mentioning earlier, it establishes these entities we call corporations and governments and so forth. And what that does is shield and protect the people from doing that, from being held accountable. And yet they're driven by the money prioritized system to make money. So they're making money off of this so they can buy something else, but they can't buy that back, that which they destroy. And it was a key ingredient to the natural selection alternative. We said that instead of no accountability, we have a hierarchical top-down system right now with no accountability from the beginning at the top on down. A lawmaker isn't held accountable for anything, for example. So we said that the trustees, we called them trustees because they wouldn't be stewards, they wouldn't be managers, they'd be trustees. And we said that trustees would be held both responsible and accountable for externalized collateral damage costs. And all of our experiences have shown over the years that everyone that lives next to one that's an area that has natural selection relationship practiced on it, their property values will increase by as much as 25%. But if you live next to a forestry operation, they will decrease by sometimes more than 25%. And for example, right now here on Thompson Creek, we have a 30, 40 acre clear cut up on the base of Little Grayback that probably depreciated property values in this valley by maybe tens of millions of dollars. But they're not accountable, and they can't be held accountable because if it's the Oregon Department of Forestry, that's the sole purpose of the Oregon Department of Forestry, is to shield and protect the operators from being accountable. In other words, when they file for an operation permit and the Oregon Department of Forestry signs off on that permit, it shifts all accountability to the state of Oregon that has none. That's the situation we're on a global scale, and it's why we are in such deep trouble. I don't expect us to survive past about mid-century.
Well, on that cheery note, let me just say that, Mr. Camp, that we will not be holding all government accountable and replacing the monetary system on this show tonight. That's for tomorrow night. But one of the things that perhaps you can tell us about is we're not going to call them family farmers, how do trustees, what's their typical day like? How do they support their families? You told me about this when I came out and visited you. How do they support their families? What's their typical operation look like? And why can they be successful, as you say, in 2 countries?
Well, first one is that the taxpayer subsidizes all of these big timber sales. That puts the small operator in competition with the taxpayer subsidized program. I remember back in the 80s, I was able to do well because I had I processed things for all different types and uses. In other words, I could take advantage of hardwoods, for example, with lumber is worth about 10 times what Douglas fir is. But back in the 80s, I remember when I was cutting small Douglas fir trees, for example, and which would have to go into something like 2-4s and 2-6s. I mean, I could cut them up into firewood and make more money than I could back in the 80s, and the price hasn't changed today, disregarding the depreciation on the value of money. But it hasn't changed today over what it was then. So that's how much the taxpayers pay for every one of these timber sales. So I just make a hugely greater amount of money by being flexible, and we just have a small mill and small, operation. But I can do all of this myself, and it's ideally a two-person operation. But you just wander out. The biggest used vehicle I have on the place is an electric golf cart. I have several golf carts, and one of the golf carts has a pickup box on it, and I carry two saws on it. One of them that'll cut the biggest trees out there, and one small one for the other things. I just go around and cut them up, and I can go out with a logging truck, and within half a day, have a load of logs into the sawmill ready to cut up. And I don't know of any clear-cut operation that can do that, and at a fraction of the cost. So I stay in business because I have a fraction of the cost. But the big problem that we have is most of the large landowners now, or larger landowners, have all subdivided their land for profit. They can't buy it back, and I never did that. But so the only way that we can get back into this kind of a style of business, I see, is the one of two things. We've somehow have to integrate small private owners into a large enough viable units to make them work, or we need a pilot project on public lands, which I think is probably the only realistic solution we have, and it's the reason the public has been supporting it for decades.
We can see on some of these television programs on the odd channels where there are people that are diving into a river and they're pulling up a single huge log, and they're all celebrating because, practically their whole summer is paid for now that they found this log. Is this the kind of thing that you're talking about, that bits and pieces pulled out with a golf cart or maybe a mule or whatever can support an entire family where it would never do to support some big agribusiness company?
Well, we've experienced that. We've not gotten rich off of it, but I'll tell you what, we've addressed virtually every other issue, and I can't think of any other occupation on earth that I would rather be doing. And we just had a couple out here a couple of days ago that, they teach environmental studies and so forth. And anyway, this is what they wanted to do too. But there just isn't an opportunity to do it. If on all of these public timber sales, you can't buy them and do that because the timber sale requirements require cutting that all at once get.
I think we lost him.
It sounds like we did.
Yes, we did.
Okay, well, Mike tries to get him back. We'll see. If we can't get him back, then we'll do what we can to summarize this. When I went out to Orville Camp's place, he was telling me about dozens of families, all up and down in Northwest America, and also into Canada, that were as like family farmers. They were working with their forest lands and not chopping it all down and replanting it all, but going in and saying, well, this one over here and that one over there and this one over here. And yes, it's a lot more intensive, but they were hauling it out, one couple logs at a time with a mule maybe, or with a horse, or with all of their children. No, I don't think so, but with like a golf cart kind of thing. And they were making a respectable amount of a living off of this. And I don't want to take this too far, but it is a little bit like survivalism. It is a little bit like that, because the idea here is that we may literally not survive if we don't have air, and if we're not, taken over by fires and etc. But these are people that can be out into the community, and they can, out in the hinterlands, and sort of like gold miners, a little bit like that. They are doing their thing and keeping enough to go beyond body and soul, send their kids off to college, that kind of thing. They can do that because they know these trees. They know them. And it doesn't mean we all got to become socialists and stop using money and, and only eat vegan or something like that. I don't know what that means, but there are ways to do this. And it looks as if the management practices of the federal government on everything is not the optimal. Mike, were you able to get him back?
Yes, I have him back, and it's a better sounding line to boot.
Oh, that's great. So, as I was just telling Mike, Orville Camp should be president, and thank you for running, sir.
Well, I've been asked to do things like that, and it's not a good use of my time. A good use of my time is educating people on how to have sustainable relationships, I think.
What do we all need to know, sir? What's the bottom line to this? That everybody ought to just wise up, especially Mike, and understand, how these things work. But beyond replacing the dollars in our pockets, I'm probably not going to be doing that anytime soon. What's the big lesson that we can learn from you and from your partner, Mother Nature?
Well, we have to deal with our environment, that we're stuck in. So we have to deal with all of these things, money and economics and all that sort of thing. And interestingly enough, no other species has an economic system either. But anyway, we have to deal with that. But I've maintained forever, just seems like forever anyway, that if I've been self-employed virtually all my life, and and if you're self-employed and you're running a business, let's say you're running a grocery store, for example, you're going to do two kinds of statements. Basically, a profit and loss statement that tells you your income and expenses and whether you supposedly have a profit. And the other one, more importantly, perhaps, is a balance sheet analysis that weighs your values before and after you do this on a yearly period, right?
Yes, sir.
But I find it interesting that forestry is the only business I know of that doesn't do a balance sheet analysis. It doesn't do it on an economic basis, in other words, a money value, but it doesn't, more importantly, do it on a biological basis. In other words, what's happening to the species habitats, the species populations, and the extinction rates, based on a replacement cost. What's happening to those on an annual basis after you get through doing what you're doing? Each and every one of those on our place increases every year. And each and every one of those on every forestry management program I've ever seen decreases. And that's why we're in deep doo-doo, to say the least.
Well, okay, if you'll hold off just a second, sir, Mike and I are going to talk about you behind your back.
Right.
Mike, I really like this guy. He really seems to have, many times he's saying things and I'm kind of like, whoa, except when he says deep doo-doo. Occasionally, I don't understand what he's saying. However, I kind of like the idea of a sustainable forest that's based on dozens and dozens of families who are earning a family wage, that they're able to put their kids through college. They're able to live kind of with nature, in nature. Not saying let's all give up our clothes or something like that, but they're able to live with their environment. And it seems like they're making some kind of sense out of this, where I have a tendency to believe, and maybe it's just my fault, that I don't always think the federal government and even our state or local government has their best interests in mind. Mike?
Yeah, yes. And precisely because it does sort of make some kind of sense, you're probably not going to see it implemented anytime soon. I would certainly like to see this in practice, because I don't have a total picture of, I know how that they would do it when they come in to harvest a particular area. They're coming in, they're taking a certain section and probably cutting everything out of it. And as opposed to selectively cutting things. I'd like to see more of how it works, because I don't really totally understand it. I'm quite sure that even Orville would say that we're only getting a very surface level look at his brand of sustainability.
Well, this is only about a 45-minute show. So,
right.
As I mentioned to him, today we're not going to be solving the international monetary system. That's tomorrow night's show. But it's supposed to be a joke. Nobody's laughing. Okay. So, but it does remind me a little bit, if you're running a big grape orchard, you make wine. Would it make any sense to you to come in and every year just practically rip up everything and start all over again?
Right.
No, you would do selective picking. You would pull certain parts out and press those, and then leave the bigger trees. You would leave them behind. Stop doing this, Mike.
Yes, certainly there's an analogy there, and you're going to be keeping some sort of a balance sheet as you're going through this. I mean, it's a business. If you're growing tomatoes, you're keeping track of the costs that you're putting into all of that, and what it would cost you to replace everything. I get what he's talking about there, this is all worth looking into more. Is your book available somewhere?
That's a great question.
Yes.
Sorry.
Well, I have a new AKA on that.
Oh, sorry to laugh, Mike, but is your book ready? Is a question he's been asked for more than a decade.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Maybe I shouldn't mention what that name is, but I started. Well, this is not my first book, of course. The first one was in '84, and I co-authored chapters in several other books, including the giant clear-cut book. I wrote the solution chapter in it that was published in '82, and another one I did a chapter in the ecoforestry book. It was published in Canada by a philosopher in Canada, and and things like that. But I started this book in November '92, and 91, I guess it was. And I'll probably never live this down because people ask me how long it would take, and I told them 6 months because I thought I had it.
Yes.
So I'm still at it. But the problem is there's two huge problems. One is the language. Our language is not suitable for talking about sustainable relationships, period, end. And the other thing is that the masses are learning from an educational system teaches them how to survive in civilization that isn't sustainable. So it's quite a task to bring them, to have them shift their total paradigm of thinking from this dominion approach to life on the planet to the natural selection approach. In other words, you have to go right back to ground zero and do that. And I do that here. We've been doing tours and workshops ever since the mid-'70s. And we had one year, this year we had 80 people on. We had another one which is too big, you can't do it well, but we generally hold them to around 20. And we had one here, a month or so ago, that we start them at 9:30 in the morning, do a 2-hour presentation on how life is sustained, break for sack lunch, for example, and then go out in the woods and try to look at it on practice. We had 20 people here, and that's the longest running one we had. It lasted till 1:30 in the morning with 6 of us standing around talking about things, finally giving up.
Yeah.
But I have another slide presentation that I do, that I have, but I never get to that point, because I don't go to that point unless I've done how the biosphere sustained life part. And the reason is because people don't understand why civilization isn't sustainable. They don't understand how natural selection sustains life. So,
you should have somebody videotape your presentation. And
I've offered. I have offered several times.
I mean, listen. I mean, if you want to get word out to mass, that's how you do it.
That's what I told him.
Well, the problem is I get pulled into so many things, I'm not getting my book out.
Well, and that's another thing that's never been easier to do, to write a book, and it can be in electronic form only. You don't have to go through the process of having it printed and shipped and all that kind of stuff. You can have it right on Amazon. People can download and read it right from there. It's a pretty instantaneous connection to people. And
I'll tell you what, when Orville Camp explains something to you, and you have the ability to understand it, unlike us, he does put it in the most basic terms, but you really do need to kind of change the way you look at things. This big, he was calling it the big clear-cut book. This is now in a form where it's a pop-up, for children. But the only problem is, and it's not selling very very well is all the pop-ups in the clear cut book. They're all cut off at the top, and so there's nothing to pop up. So it's not been really successful.
I wasn't even aware they did that.
No, that's the comedy part of the show I was trying to tell you about. Okay,
that
sorry.
was Dale's attempt at comedy.
It's a pop-up book. Never mind.
I'm really concerned, based on past experience, that I don't want the book to be in such a way that the industry could co-opt it and turn it into their caveats, which they're famous for doing. In other words, they take something and take it out of context and make it into something it isn't, and there's nobody better doing that than the forestry industry.
Nice.
The whole thing is a classic fraud, in my opinion.
Okay, so the last question that we have to ask you here at the end of the show is, so people watch tonight's show, and they say, you know, I'm concerned. I would like to do something to help. What is it that regular folks can do to help introduce a little bit of sanity? Oh boy, this is impossible. But what can regular people do to try to introduce a little bit of sanity into all this that goes beyond wearing a mask when you walk outdoors these days?
That's a really tough question because the system, our whole culture, it's a servitude culture. It's a slave system. And mind media and information control, for example, is ultimately controlled by those with the most power and money. And so how to do that is a real challenge. That's a whole different discussion. We've been seeking people that really are interested in sitting down and really talking about how to do this in a more effective way. And it always comes back to why I should get my book out. One thing that they can do, probably would do more than anything else, would be to support the BLM RMP EIS that has the natural selection alternative in it. It's about a 4 or 5 inch document. To support the natural selection alternative was submitted, and there's probably thousands of people who supported it, but to support it, and the reason being is it was submitted, but they rejected it without doing any data on it. I don't know if you're aware of that. If you want to go in, it's Volume 1, Chapter 2, Alternatives. It's Volume 1, page 79. And basically, they rejected it for all of the reasons, all their own reasons. And how you can reject something without doing a data analysis on it is unbelievable. But they did. So anyway, the hearing ends on the 21st of this month.
Now, I believe that meeting is going to be, for some reason, it's going to be in Medford. If I understand this right, he's talking about the resource management plan. We've heard a bit from the commissioners on this. It's Simon Hare that's been taking the leadership on this. Oh, that's great. But is there a way that people can show their support for that section of the RMP, the resource management plan, sir?
Well, I'm not sure how to do that. We sent out a number of letters on it, 1 or 2 page letters on what they can do, and there's been a lot of people sign letters on that. So they can address the Bureau of Land Management Draft Resource Management Plan / Environmental Impact Statement for Western Oregon, and the comments are due by August the 21st of 2015. And let's see here.
I'll tell you what we'll do on our part. We've run a little website that does okay. Some people are looking at it. 275,000 views, I think now. well, we do have some presence on Facebook as well, where it's a little easier to put things like, here, click on this. And because these are videos, clicking on a video, it just plays or it doesn't play. But maybe what we can do is, if you have no objection to sending Mike and I links to the places where people could go, they could click on there and send a letter saying, I support this. Then we can share that with some people on Facebook and etc., so that when they want to make a difference, they can, at the very least, they can send some kind of letter or an email message. Would you agree to that, sir?
Sure, yeah. There's another thing. Ernie Nemi has done. I don't know if you know who he is or not. He's out of Eugene. He's internationally known, but he's done an economic analysis on what they're proposing to do, and that one has been put on Facebook, I believe, YouTube, I guess. So you can go on Ernie Nemi and get a presentation. He could be referred to. Another thing, there should be a website big time on this. There's no question about that. But anyway, yeah, we can. I can have Mary. She can send you a whole bunch of data on the thing.
That sounds great, with the very least, so that we can tell people how to show their support for this draft regional resource management plan that's being, where input is being solicited from citizens to give some advice to the federal government, sir.
Yeah, that would be great. And we could go on, into this, but I don't know. It's almost, they're separate. I mean, the natural selection alternative that was submitted is probably a separate subject into itself, and we've got a book written on it already.
All right, listen, I want in on that movie deal. Okay, thank you very much for your time, sir. We really appreciate you sharing this with us, and for the parts that we could understand, we're grateful.
Okay, well, the parts you can't understand, well, we'll have to do something about that.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
All right.